book from time to time and you really burn the midnight oil with it, well, this has certainly been my experience of Secrets of the Centenarians. It's the latest novel by John Withington, looking all into the life of people who have lived for a century and also what it's like and what are our chances of surviving to 100. I'm delighted to have him on the show with us this afternoon. John, welcome to BBC Essex.
Hello, Tony. By the way, it's not a novel. It's not supposed to be made up.
I know. Yeah, absolutely. In fact, that's what I found the most interesting thing about the book is the fact that some of these stories are just absolutely incredible, aren't they? Particularly the oldest recorded man, which was quite recent, really, wasn't it? Which he pushed over 120 years.
He did, but he didn't. There was a man called Shigecheo Izumi who was a Japanese, about 4'9" tall and weighed about 6.5 stone. And he made great copy. Journalists used to go and interview him, and he would drink local hooch. He would, if they brought attractive young interpreters with them, he would sing to them. He was great copy. He made a marvellous story, but he was only, if I could use that word, 105 in fact. His birth certificate had got mixed up with a relative's, and that does unfortunately happen sometimes.
Yeah, and that's fascinating in itself. Going back to the very idea behind this, John, you were working on a TV show, which maybe you remember, called TVI, and you did actually a documentary on this to start with, didn't you?
That's right, that was in 1986, and what happened was I saw a tiny little story in the newspaper saying that at that time there were 2,000 centenarians in the UK compared with just 230 years before, fastest growing section of the population. So I thought this would make a fascinating programme, so I made that television programme. Now obviously I've worked on many other things, other programmes, other books since then, but I've always followed the story of the centenarians, and now there are 14,000 of them in the UK, so 7 times as many as there were back in the 1980s.
It really is quite incredible. At the beginning of the book, we start pretty much with Methuselah and then work our way through history, but what I found intriguing was why we believe what we believe about these people that we've grown up with, these names that we've grown up with, like Methuselah and the rest of them. And one interesting point you make in the book is the fact that they may have been counting at the time things like months rather than years.
Yes, there are all sorts of theories as to why Methuselah allegedly lived to 969. One is the one you mentioned. The problem with that theory is that you get some odd results, like you get some very old people who would have fathered children when they were sort of 3 years old and this kind of thing. And there was also just an idea that they took a number and multiplied it by, say, 10. And there was even a theory that there was some sort of complex mathematical formula that linked the very aged, like Methuselah and Noah. But it may just be that they thought that by giving people these immense ages, it made them sound important.
Yes, absolutely. And these are stories that we've grown up with, from childhood onwards. But getting back to more recent times, another part of the book which intrigued me was our perception of age and how that has changed over the years. And you mentioned the fact that, Jane Fonda in the 1970s was held up, as looking good at 40, and then in the 1980s we had Joan Collins looking good at 50, and so it continues. And isn't it strange how now we are all, touch wood and all the rest of it, but we are all expecting to live a lot longer anyway?
Well, that's right. Life expectancy has increased pretty remorselessly. As we said, 7 times as many centenarians as there were 30 years ago. There has been a slight blip over the last couple of years, and life expectancy hasn't been increasing quite as quickly as it was. Some people say that might be austerity, other people say it might be just a statistical blip. But no, we hear, don't we, that 70 is the new 60 and all of that. And I write about people who ran marathons at 100, people who were water skiing, winning golf tournaments, running the 100 metres in record times. So, yes, I think you're right that our perception of what it means to be old has changed very dramatically.
And of course, the male-female, now this is a really interesting one, isn't it? That, you can go back quite a way and say that women have always, in general, lived longer than men. And it seems that there are quite a lot more women who hit 100 than men.
That's right, about 5 to 1 in the UK at the moment, though the gap is narrowing. It got up to 7 or 8 to 1. In South Korea, I think it was 9 to 1. Now, they're obviously, and that has gone on for several hundred years. It's gone on really since childbirth stopped being a really, really dangerous activity and just became a dangerous one. They used to say in the Middle Ages you had more chance of dying in childbirth than you had if you went into a battle. But once that was conquered, then women did survive better, and at the moment, women survive better at all ages in the UK than men.
It's amazing, isn't it, when I was reading about the various stories of people that have had, a good innings, shall we say, from the times when we had all these different diseases that were lingering around. We were in times of battles, all kinds of things going on, and it makes their innings look even more impressive, doesn't it, because of everything that was thrown against them.
Well, it does, and when you hear that a man who survived the concentration camps went on to be the oldest man in the world, that's quite staggering. You would have got a pretty decent odds against that happening. And then, of course, in Essex, Albert Marshall, the last surviving cavalryman from the First World War, he's a number of people who managed to survive that dreadful conflict and lived to beyond 100. Again, an astonishing achievement.
During that research, did you notice that there was any connection between that very idea that there is somebody who has lived through something quite horrendous, who in a way has built this tolerance, shall we say, for what was to come next?
Well, I think the one thing that does come across is that the will to live does seem to be quite important. Let me give you an illustration. If you look at the millennium, the beginning of the new millennium in the year 2000, the death rate before the millennium fell very dramatically, and then it rose dramatically after the millennium. So that does rather look, doesn't it, like people were trying to hang on for the millennium. And so will to live does seem to be quite a strong factor in who survives. Having said that, of course, it's probably easier to have a strong will to live if you're healthy.
Yes, yeah, and we do tend to hold up those people who've lived a full life, shall we say, and yet still managed to knock up the years. You hear stories all the time, don't you, of people that have smoked since they were sort of 14 years old and they've lived to be 101 and all the rest of it. I mean, during your research, how common was it for you to find many people who've pretty much done what they wanted and still managed to rack up some years?
Well, there was a man called Alfie Grant from Essex who was a market trader. He lived to 107, smoking 10 cigarettes a day. Incidentally, he never married and never owned a car. But yes, of course, you get some smokers who live to be 100. But smoking is probably one of the clearest risks, that if you smoke, it does reduce your chances of reaching 100 fairly dramatically.
Now, also in the book, we chat an awful lot about location, about where people live, and if that does have any kind of indication about how long you're going to live. What did you surmise from your research on that subject?
Well, there's lots of myths about where you should live, and there are lots of remote valleys like the Hunza Valley in Pakistan, and which is supposed to be Shangri-La, and a remote valley in Ecuador where men, and it is usually men, live to prodigious ages, and similarly the Caucasus in Russia, where you're told that men live to 150 still working, still riding horses. None of those things really stack up. They've been investigated fairly heavily over the last 40 or 50 years, and none of those really stack up. However, there are some places where extraordinary longevity is achieved. So there's part of Sardinia, the island of Sardinia, not the whole island. The whole island has lower life expectancy than the rest of Italy, but there is a little pocket in a mountainous area where centenarians are more common. And one of the reasons, oddly for that, some people think might be inbreeding. I mean, we generally think of inbreeding as a bad thing. People talk about hybrid vigour. But the theory was that perhaps there's some strange genetic component that these people have that we've not yet detected, and that was being passed on because they kept intermarrying and not marrying outside.
I mean, everybody likes to think of themselves living to an old age, or do they? Because I've had a very interesting email when I was mentioning you were coming on, John, from Michael, who's in Colchester, and he said, I ran my own carpet cleaning company for 26 years and would say to my elderly customers that I would come back and clean their carpets for free on their 100th birthday. A surprising number of those said they hoped not to be around to take up my offer. They thought that their quality of life would not be very good. Now that's interesting, isn't it?
It is. Now, when we did this television program that you talked about in the 1980s, one of the things we did a survey of 100-year-olds, and one of the questions we asked them was, are you glad to have lived to be 100? And 74 of the 100 said they were. A lot, again, depends on health, and I think one of the problems with surveys like that one, and like all the surveys that are done on 100-year-olds, is that the people least likely to be involved in the survey are those who are unwell and not up to it, or who've lost their mental faculties in some way. So there is a danger that in surveys we present too rosy a picture. Having said that, I mean, one of the things that I was astonished by is the thing you were talking about earlier. That I was astonished to hear about the things that 100-year-olds are still doing. You know, there was a wonderful case of a woman in America who had to drop out of school, and at 100 she got the high school diploma that she'd missed out on.
It's amazing, isn't it? It really is. And it's a fascinating book. John, it's been a great pleasure chatting to you this afternoon. Thank you so much for your time. And I look forward to reading. What are you working on next, by the way?
I'm writing another book, but I'm sworn to secrecy on the topic, I'm afraid.
Is it about secrets? Maybe that's the reason why. Another secret book. It's lovely to have you. Thanks very much indeed for your time. John Withington, Secrets of Centenarians is out right now, and it's available in hardback, and it's actually out right now, just to let you know, and it's from Reaction Books, by the way. Reaction spelled REAKTION. Wonderful to chat to me. I really recommend it. It's kept me up night to that book. It's amazing. BBC Essex, we all have great guests for you every weekday afternoon.